At that point, God says there are consequences for what you've done. So it's the process of working that is impacted by sin.
Kara Martin, an adjunct professor at the Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary, works with the Theology of Work project. She is the author of the Workship series of books. A sought-after speaker, Kara's education is bivocational with a master's in both Christian studies and commerce.
Can we legitimately think, how can I be Jesus to these people here? What would that take? And God, please show me how I can do that, create the opportunity.
Kara is a powerful voice in the Monday movement, championing an integrated Christian life in many educational, mentoring, and commercial roles. She is an articulate voice, steeped in theological rigor and contextual teaching, calling us to co-labor in the glory of God, who includes us in his work.
So this is his work that we're joining in on. It's not our work that we're inviting him into. It's actually seeing that the things that he's gifted us to do and to give him the glory, to worship him in that.
To be a little bit of confusion between a woman's role in the church in some denominations and the translation of that maybe into the workplace. There's some confusion there, I think, around that. Do you find that?
To hear women celebrated in their work as well would just be lovely. I was a stay-at-home mum. I consulted at the same time, but I was a stay-at-home mum. Mothering is one of the most important works I've done. But I see it as a work. It was unpaid work. It was joyful, fulfilling work.
Kara, so thank you so much for coming down today.
Thanks, Mark.
It's great to see you. I hold you in the highest regard. I mean, I talk about faith and work integration and often from my own experiences and coming from a non-Christian background. So I am light theologically, I would say. And you have had an entire lifetime really embedded in this whole faith and work integration. You've done some phenomenal things. One thing that I might just mention before we get going is your books. If you haven't read these books called Workship, then you need to do that if you're in this space at all. So you have to read mine first and then Kara's. But
always. It's a good order.
So Workship really talks about how do you integrate your faith and your work. And then if you want to really thrive, the marketing department came up with a fantastic title, Workship 2, but really how you flourish. But these are deep books. They have a wonderful combination of the theological backing, which is I'd love to spend a bit of time talking about today, but also the practical application and also peppered with some nice dangerous prayers, which is great. So I love that. So
I like
Kara,
dangerous prayers.
thank you so much for coming. In Workship 2, there's a little quote that you talk about God using us. What's the quote again? It's the glory of God. And
who invites us to join in his work.
I love it. So what do you mean by that, join in his work?
Well, I think that's the story right from the beginning. That's exactly what God does. So he creates the world. We read in Genesis 1. In Genesis 2:5, it's sort of Genesis 2 is a retelling of Genesis 1 in some ways from a different angle, but God has made this beautiful garden. It's flourishing. And then God says, but there was no one to work in it with him.
Yeah.
And so then he creates human beings. It's that sort of retelling part. So we're actually created to work with God in his garden, this world. So that's the work that's before us. He's assigned us as his image bearers to steward his creation. And the way we steward creation is through our ordinary work.
Yeah.
So this is his work that we're joining in on. It's not our work that we're inviting him into. It's actually seeing that the things that he's gifted us to do, he's gifted us because he wants us to steward his creation, which includes people as well as things, the things that are made from creation. And then he wants us to work with him in that and to give him the glory, to worship him in that.
And it's interesting that the work came before the fall.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so critical. I think, unfortunately, most of the world sees work since the fall. And it's true that work is impacted by sin.
Yeah.
We know that. It's hard to convince people about sin until you start talking about their workplace and the colleague they don't like and how structures are broken and, systems are broken. And then suddenly it's easy to talk about sin after all. Yeah, this is a broken world.
Yeah.
But the critical thing is to realize that work existed before the fall. Yeah. So work itself is a good thing. And if you read in Genesis 3 where it describes what happens, Adam and Eve have disobeyed God. They've started to try and sort of usurp some of God's authority, which is not what we're meant to do. At that point, God says there are consequences for what you've done. And work is part of the consequence. But if you read in Genesis 3, in verse 19, you realize that it's the ground that is cursed.
Yes.
It's not work itself.
Yeah.
So it's the process of working that is impacted by sin. Work is still a good thing, but it's going to be harder and less fruitful and more of a struggle. But most people, and unfortunately also when we hear it from the pulpit, it's often in churches as well, most people start with work is cursed, which is wrong.
Yeah.
Work is not cursed. It's the process that's cursed.
Absolutely, yeah. So the ground is cursed, it's not the work itself. So that's bad news for heaven then, isn't it? It's obviously going to be some work done up there if it's part of this plan.
And that's no one wants to think about that. We want to lie back on clouds and eat chocolate. But the thing is that it'll be work that is good work, that is productive work, and we'll be working with God. That connection with God that is broken, that was broken at the fall, will be unbroken. So we'll be working in perfect partnership with God. Yeah. And that's beautiful. We get a glimpse of it here on earth. There are moments in our work where we're completely in sync with God and aligned with God, and it's beautiful, and we get a sense of that. But then something happens and we get distracted, or we think we've got it now, God, thank you, see you later. And then, rats, got that wrong. We can't continue it necessarily, or we come across brokenness in the world. But in heaven, we'll be working perfectly together with God, dwelling with God. Amazing.
Love that. Because there's scriptures that talk about co-laboring with him too, aren't there?
Yeah. It's we're assigned to be. I think the word vice-regent is probably the best terminology. That's what it means when God gives us the authority to be an image bearer. We're labouring under God's authority, but we're labouring with him.
Yeah.
And so that sense of, because I think there's a tendency in us to try and wrestle it back from God. I was talking to someone.
Just a tendency?
Yeah, sorry. It's a very strong tendency, even when we know it. So I'll give you an example. The week before last, I just had this crazy 27 hours of work where it was just, I had 6 major things to do, and they were beautiful things I'd been invited into. And when I said yes to them, I didn't realise they were all going to be within this period of time.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine just said to me, she'd gone through a burnout experience, and she said, Cara, I just want you to know that it's often the spiritual and the mental that goes before you feel physically exhausted.
Yeah.
I said, oh, thanks for that.
Yeah, that's good.
And I said, I've kept up with my rhythms and I've Sabbathed and it's all good. And then I got challenged in my spirit. And I realised that what I've been doing is charging ahead of God. Yeah. Like I hadn't been co-labouring with him.
Yeah.
I'd been thinking, okay, I've got this and I'm doing the next thing, and I'd been driven by adrenaline, and it was all good stuff. It was good stuff for God. But I suddenly realised, no, I'm not in that moment saying, you're here, God, and we're doing this together. I want to listen to you. I was like, I've got this, God. And so it was a real, I had to go back to her and apologise and said, thank you. Your word was just what I needed to hear.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we can certainly run ahead of that agenda, can't we?
100% all the time.
Yeah, just all the time. It's that sort of paradox, isn't it? Like what part of it is God? Is it us? But I think we're all uniquely created for a purpose and a place, and anointed for that, and equipped for that. And there's usually an alignment between our capabilities and our desires and those things. And yet if we run ahead of that, it can all go horribly wrong.
It does. Absolutely. Yeah. And I've been in that place a few times. I think that's just my personality. I think Sometimes I don't hear the still small voice of God, even though, I'm doing it for God all the time. And then often it's something happens and I just realize, he breaks into my world. And if I'm not listening long enough, that was just a few days of running ahead of God. But if I'm, spend a month running ahead of God because I've got this, then sometimes God engineers a bigger shock. And in that crucible is the process of sort of refinement and just humbling and realizing, no.
Yeah.
I'm listening now, God. I'm all ears. You've got my full attention.
Reset. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he equipped me as far as that's concerned by putting me in situations I had absolutely no idea what to do.
Yeah.
In industries I had no ken for. So, being in a situation with massive challenges, I've just had to lean into him all the time, which has been.
And that's the best place to be, isn't it?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I often wonder, how do people who don't have a faith like that function?
Yeah.
It's, I wasn't raised I know what it's like not to know him and to know him. But the difference is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
What about the whole piece around obedience and surrender to him? Because we can have Jesus as Savior, but is he Lord? The passage that comes to mind is Joshua.
Yeah.
When he meets the angel, and he said, like, whose side are you on? Are you them or us? And he goes, no, I'm on God's side. Like, what side are you on? Pretty much. I think often, I'll bump into some very well-meaning people who are driven and focused, but it's almost like they're asking God to support them in their desires and their career or what they want to do, as opposed to going to God and going, like, what do you want?
Yeah.
Like, where do we go from here, and what do you want in my life?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think there's a real danger in that. We want God's favor all the time.
Yeah.
But the way of Jesus is also the way of suffering.
Yeah. Because there's a brokenness element to that surrender, isn't there?
There is. And it may be through the suffering, and sometimes by God's grace it's not.
Yeah.
But we can't think, if you think that God only is going to show you favor, when you hit a difficulty, a blockage, a problem, if you hit something which was unexpected, it's like, where is God?
Hang on a second.
Yeah, this wasn't a part of the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. God, I gave you everything, but look what you're giving me.
Yeah.
So there has to be that just humble obedience.
Yes.
And that's what we need all the time. We need to be shaped.
Definitely.
I love Eugene Peterson said the primary location for spiritual formation is church, right?
Yeah.
No, he didn't say that. Even though he was a pastor. The primary location for spiritual formation is when you go on a retreat. No, he didn't say that. Even though he was a theologian and ran retreats. He said the primary location for spiritual formation is the workplace.
Wow. There you go.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah. Because the workplace is where you get challenged, you get tested, where, we can pretend on Sunday for an hour or two that we're God's best person, but in the workplace where you're spending the majority of your time, that's where it's harder to hide some of the brokenness and the frailties that we might have.
Absolutely.
And that's where you have to choose the fruit of the Spirit. Yeah. Amongst God's people, I can be joyful. In the workplace where, I'm beset by stress and pressure, I have to choose to be joyful sometimes, and I need God's Spirit to fill me with joy. Amongst God's people, I can be patient most of the time. Mostly they're pretty nice. But in the workplace, I often have to choose to be patient. Yeah. And sometimes it's really hard. But that patience that I show and that peace that I show may be the things that people need to see when they're not coping under the pressure to say, you're different. What is that?
Yeah, what is going on with you?
Yeah. And that's the place where God is shaping us to become more and more like Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we spend more time at work than doing literally anything else.
Yep.
So I think if we exclude that from an awareness of God in the midst of that, then that becomes a fundamental problem. We almost will work like anyone else does in the workplace, as opposed to really thinking about God on a Wednesday afternoon as much as a Sunday morning.
100%.
And yet, I think that secular sacred divide, the dual thinking, seems still to be the prevailing culture in Christian circles. Would you say that's true?
Yes, it's so depressing to say that.
Is it changing, do you think?
I keep thinking it is, and then, I realize it's not. I think there's a younger generation who are more integrated in many ways, and they're testing it and challenging it a bit more, which is really, really pleasing. I think we've had a movement in theological colleges to actually say, okay, we realise this split is here and we need to overcome it. What's really interesting to me is that the people in where Christianity is growing the fastest, so Asia and Africa and South America, the split is actually diminishing there, which is really, really pleasing.
Yeah.
It's in the Western cultures where we hold on to it a bit more. And I think that's because it's a split that in some ways suits the church and suits society. So the church likes it because the split means that for pastors, the church is it. This is our kingdom that we can grow here. And that feels you've got more control over that, and people come to you for everything they need spiritually. And so, that feels a nice, happy place. And for society, they don't want religion in the workplace.
Sure.
So, you stay away, you take your faith, you keep it private, you keep it personal, that's fine. You can have that, but don't let it interfere here. So it suits both sides. The problem is it's unsustainable.
Yeah.
We can't grow as Christians if we're living these bifurcated lives, this disintegrating lives where, church on Sunday, someone else on Monday. That's just is not healthy for us as human beings. And the church is diminishing because of it. And it's the reality.
That's an uncomfortable truth, isn't it?
It is an uncomfortable truth.
Yeah.
I was speaking to the head of the International Fellowship of Evangelical Students, so overseeing a lot of the student work that happens, Christian groups that happen on campus. And I said, what is the percentage of Christians who go to your groups? Like we hear about, Christians, people becoming Christians at universities. That's fantastic, but what is the percentage? Do you track what happens to those people when they go out into the workplace?
Yeah.
And he said, yes, we do, but we don't talk about it.
Right.
And I said, why is that? And he said, well, I said, I've heard that it might be about 50% fall away. And he said, that's the minimum.
Wow.
He said, we have 50 to 80% of Christians in our groups who fall away within the first few years of work.
Right.
Because they haven't been equipped for the workplace. They haven't been discipled into the workplace. They've been discipled into head knowledge and belief, but they haven't been discipled into how do I live that out and practice it when I'm in the workplace.
Yeah.
So it's a huge challenge.
It is a massive challenge, isn't it? And vice versa too. I think people who are very engaged with the marketplace movement and they understand that dynamic have almost sort of given up on church. I think that's an absolute anathema as well. We need both. We need healthy Christian communities, and we need to be plugged into that, but also the function of pastors and teachers about releasing people into works of service. For me, that is releasing people into their vocations, into what God has built them for and whatever sphere of influence they're called to. And that is as sacred a calling as running a church. And if you say that in certain circles, you kind of get dragged outside into a car park and stoned, or at least get sort of accused of being a heretic. But I'm used to that now. No, but there is, I think there's a wonderful opportunity here, and I think the Christian culture is in transition.
Yes.
I mean, you and I have been talking about these things for probably 20 years-ish.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a greater understanding. I think I'm having more conversations about those things now that's more accepted, probably because of the challenges within churches that are struggling.
Yep.
And there's a and people are now understanding that the people are not going to come in the front door. We need to go out and connect, see our work and our vocations, work with excellence and serve those around us and love those and hear from God on a Wednesday afternoon as much as a Sunday, and that Monday matters to him, that there's a whole, it's not about surviving the week and then sort of running into the church for a little huddle and then, having to go back into the big evil world again. That there's a complete experience of following Jesus 7 days a week. You talked a bit about the pressures that we have at work. I love that because there's an opportunity, I think, if we recognize him to grow.
Yes, 100%.
And why have you parked me next to that person again? What's that all about? 100%. Or now I'm working for this boss who is completely unreasonable.
Yes.
What's my response to that?
100%. That's beautiful.
And then we can allow the Holy Spirit to transform us. So things can happen on the inside of us if we respond in the workplace, and see that as part of our complete sort of life integration and calling.
That's one of the things when I'm part of small groups. I really hate that point in small groups where we ask for prayer points and people say, "Oh, I've got this person I'm working with, and they're horrible," and ask God to take them away, or I'm really not enjoying my work. Ask God to open up a new opportunity. The question I often go back to people is, how is God shaping you through that person?
Yeah.
How is God shaping you through that challenge at work?
Oh, I don't like those questions.
It's much better to ask God to take it away than to
people on the spot. Yeah.
And
that's great.
Yeah, I think that's it. That's part of partnering with God in his work, because his work is stewarding creation, but it's also the inner work, the work in us, shaping us and changing us. And so partnering with God in our work is also God using those experiences and those opportunities to actually to make us more like Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. I see that. I have a sort of structure that I try and think about these things through, and the first two is work to provide and work to grow. So he uses it to resource, he uses it to, and we steward that, but he uses it to grow. Like that's important. And then the second two are for other people around serving and witnessing.
Yep.
And the last two are really for him, an expression of him, which is work to create and then work to worship.
That's beautiful.
So we've joined at the top there with the work to worship. Can we dig down on that a little bit? Because
Love it.
It's a very foreign concept to people generally when I have this conversation of that work can be worshipful. What's your thinking and sort of theological basis of that? What we do on a Monday to Friday can actually be worshipful.
Yeah. Thank you. It's why I called my book Workship.
Yeah. Exactly. I thought that might be the case.
So in Genesis 2:15, after God realizes there's no one to work with him in the garden, he creates the human being to work with him. He says he took the human being, put him in the garden to work the earth and to keep the garden. And the Hebrew root verbs there are avad, to work the earth, and shema, to keep the garden. And those Hebrew root verbs are later used in the Bible to talk about what the priests are doing in the temple. So they are to serve God or worship God, avad, and they are to ensure the boundaries of the law, keep the law, obedience to the law, if you like, and that's shema. So right there in Scripture, right from the beginning, we get this linguistic link between work, service, worship, and also obedience. It's all there right at the beginning.
Yep.
And that makes sense of a whole load of things we read in the Bible. So when the prophets are railing at Israel, they're railing not just about, you've turned your back on worship, but they're also railing at the people because you're oppressing your workers, as it says in Isaiah 58:2, or you're using measures that are not equal in the marketplace, you're ripping people off, if you like, or you're doing poor quality work. That's just as much of a concern to God as the worship practices.
Absolutely.
So in Isaiah 58:2, it's actually saying, you think you're worshiping me by your fasting and your sacrifices, but you're doing this other stuff.
Yeah.
So it's not just what you believe and, what you do on a Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah.
It's actually what you do through the week that God measures as well.
Yeah.
So there's consistency all through Scripture. And we see it in the early church. There's a fabulous book by Matthew Kamink and Corey Wilson called Work and Worship, where they trace this all the way through the Scriptures, but they've also done some digging into the early church. And one of the things they talk about was archaeologists had dug up this site in modern-day Italy, and they couldn't work out what it was because there were these frescoes around the wall of people doing work. And they were thinking, okay, what could this be? And it wasn't like a guild, which existed at the time, because there were different sorts of work that were shown in the frescoes. And guilds were, you could be in the certain guild that made wine, or the guild that was a baker, but you wouldn't have these mixed together. So they just couldn't work it out. Could it be sort of a council building or something? They weren't sure. They eventually discovered that it's one of the earliest known worship places.
Right.
So right there at the beginning, when Christians gathered,
That's great.
they celebrated their work.
Yeah.
And there weren't the sort of separations that we've got now, because you had people from all sorts of different work, as we do now, coming together. And when it was time for communion wasn't a little bit of juice or wine or a bit of bread. The baker would bring the bread.
Yeah.
The person who made the wine would bring the wine, but you'd also have the butcher bringing meat, and you'd have the gardener bringing vegetables, and, the carpenter would make a bigger table because the church was growing, and people would bring their work into the workspace. And communion was this interaction of what I do during the week and the feast that we're enjoying together, which is a celebration of what God has provided and the work we're doing together. And what's left over goes to the minister and their family, and then gets spread amongst the community to the people in need. So there wasn't this sort of artificial breakdown that we have now between our work during the week and then what we do on a Sunday. It was like it was all there.
Yeah.
And it was celebrated in the panels around the wall, which was a reminder that we are coming together to honour God for the way He has blessed us, to be equipped and pray for each other, and then we're going out again to tell the good news, to show the good news, to demonstrate the good news in our generosity, our service, our loving people through our work.
I love that. That's so good. I like Brother Lawrence.
Yes.
He talks about he could sense the presence of God as much in the prayer closet as he could, mending sandals and doing the washing up, which is bottom of the monkdom or whatever that hierarchy is. But I think there's something so important in that, is that completely integrated life experience of God, where you experience Him as much in the workplace as you do on a Sunday. Yeah. And it's great to come together and to worship and those things, but I think we've lost this ability to really think about Him, be aware of His presence, hear from Him. I think regardless of what we're doing, we should expect what we think a missionary has. So to hear from God, to expect opportunities, to be able to share, to serve those around us. Yeah, that's exactly the same mandate of whether you're a priest or a plumber. It's the same.
Absolutely. I think of my friend Angela. So her view of God, which I think a lot of Christians in the pews is, she was feeling guilty in the pew because she hadn't become a proper Christian, because she hadn't given up her work to go to Bible college or whatever. And then she got challenged. She's a friend, so she read my book. She had to.
Yeah, that's right. It's compulsory.
And what she realised that what she'd thought is, when she went to work, it was like God was in her backpack. You take God to work, and every now and then you let Him out. You say, oh, I was at church on Sunday or something. Or, but what she realised was God wasn't in her backpack. It wasn't up to her to take God to work. God was there in her workplace already and doing stuff. And she'd actually hadn't become alive to Him, what He was doing in her workplace. So her prayer changed from, God, give me an opportunity to say something today, to, God, show me where you're already working in my workplace. Open my eyes. And as a result of that, she realised there were some cleaners in her workplace who were struggling because they had sickness and there was a problem with mold and no one was listening. And she had a particular job in that workplace where she was able to access the CEO of the workplace as well as chat to the cleaners. And she advocated on behalf of the cleaners to the CEO.
Great.
And suddenly, instead of her having to look for that opportunity around the water cooler, she had the cleaners saying, why are you doing this for us?
Yeah.
And she had the CEO saying, why are you asking me about this?
Yeah.
And she was able to witness to both of them that because God is prompting me that this is something he cares about, that this is important. I'm a Christ follower.
Yeah.
And this is what Jesus would do.
I love that. And I think if you are aware of God is interested in your work, you see the opportunities.
Absolutely.
And, I think there's a lot of wisdom required in the midst of that. Turning up to morning tea with your full King James and like just, the 4-kilo Bible, probably not going to go down very well.
Yep.
Probably going to spend a lot of time in front of HR, which you have a master's in, so you know all about that. As opposed to having the wisdom of hearing from him, walking with him, being prayerful and mindful of his presence wherever we are and whatever we're doing. And then we can recognize the opportunities.
Yep.
I had a group of business leaders a little while ago, and part of that was we shared some life stories together, and I talked about a spiritual component to my life, etc. And I bumped into him a month later, one of them, and he said, that spiritual stuff you talked about? He said, yes. Like, where is this going to be going? He said, I need that.
Oh, wow.
Very successful business person, like really doing well, but recognized there was this piece missing in his life. Yeah. And so giving him a whole bunch of things to go away and have a think about. And it's an ongoing dialogue from there. So no doubt he'll give his life to the Lord at some point on that journey.
That's the difference. There's a huge amount of difference between us trying to force something in and someone coming to us and asking us.
Absolutely.
You can't be hauled between HR before HR if you say, well, she asked me to pray for her or she asked me to do this. Some people have tried that, but it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You're not doing anything wrong then. But also you've got someone who's curious and asking questions and you've got a relationship then as well. It's not, I need a notch on my Bible. Yeah. It's actually, I care about you and you've noticed I care and that I genuinely want to advocate for you. Yeah. And I want to know more now.
Definitely. Like if we work with excellence and integrity and genuinely serve people around us, it stands out.
Yeah, it
and
does.
also we carry something with us that people notice, whether we're aware of it or not. They're looking. But if we're in late, out early, we're the ones that are doing the gossiping, or alternative just being weird. Like, can we stop being weird? That'd be great. Just engage with the organization you're in and work hard, do the right thing, be part of the solution or part of the problem. See it as I'm working for God.
Yes.
Not for my very flawed boss.
Yeah.
And being part of the solution, I think makes a big difference.
Dorothy L. Sayers said in an essay that was written over 80 years ago, which was called Why Work? She said, the very first demand that my religion makes of me is that I should do good work.
Love it.
So that's the very first responsibility we have, to live completely surrendered to God in everything we do, paid or unpaid. Whatever we do with intent or purpose, that's what work is. Yeah. To do that in a total obedience and surrender, to do that work well to the glory of God. Yeah.
Yeah. So good. So good. It's such a big key. Like what Martin Luther said about, like, if you're a cobbler, don't put crosses on your shoes. Just make good shoes. Like, it's just simple. Just do that, and you'll be fine. So God is interested in our work.
Yes,
we've established that. Hopefully, that's landed with some people. What sort of response do you think people should have if they're wrestling with this whole thing of, okay, I have a calling. God's called me to this vocation. He wants me to do this particular, say, a sales rep in an organization. What should they do as far as a response to, okay, God's interested in my work, now what?
Yeah, great question. One of the things I talk about in both my books is about spiritual disciplines for the workplace. Yes. So, if I could just take time to run through some of those.
That'd be great.
So the first one is holy working, and we've sort of hinted at that. And that's the idea of we've got to be ethical in the way we do our work.
We do.
Because, if we say, yeah, I love Jesus, and then we're lying or cheating or stealing, or then, what sort of witness is that? We're not bearing good fruit. And people are going to say just hypocrite, which has been the accusation against the church for a long while.
Yeah.
So
only 2,000 years.
Yeah. That's right. So holy working is important.
Yeah.
There's also gospel working, and gospel working I see as both sort of Bible-centered working as well as sort of when we have opportunity to proclaim what we believe when those questions come. And to do that well, we need to know our Bibles.
Yes, we do.
And we need to understand that our Bibles can actually relate to the world about us in really profound ways.
Yep.
So I think of Phoebe, who is someone who she was head of the Asia Pacific region for a big corporate. And one time she had a meeting with her boss, her big boss, the global head. And he said, I want you to follow up on this. And she said, okay, I'll just go and do that right now on my computer. And she went into her office and she became aware that the boss had followed her into her office, which is fine, of course. But around her computer, she had these Bible verses from Proverbs and Psalms. And as she's typing away, she could just feel him leaning in. And she was like, oh my gosh, he's reading those verses.
Yeah.
And then he said, these are amazing. And he said, where are they from? And she said, well, they're from a sacred text, ancient sacred text. And he said, oh, that's so cool. He said, I want these up in our boardroom.
Yeah.
He said, can you get these like graphically designed, made really beautiful? He said, this is real wisdom. We need this.
Yeah.
And we need our people to see this. And she said, sure.
I'd love to do that.
Absolutely. And so she did. She had them graphically designed and beautifully made up, these big posters, put them up in the boardroom, and he just was thrilled with them. He's so thrilled with them that when he had meetings in there, he would point them out to people. He said, look at these. This is fantastic.
Yeah.
It's from an ancient sacred text.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she gets a kick out of the fact that every single important meeting has the word of God around it. So board meetings with clients, staff meetings, it's there. It's witnessing. She gets to explain what they are, what they mean, where they come from. Just beautiful. That's gospel working.
Yeah.
And then we've got to have prayerful working. I'm amazed how few Christians pray for their work, pray while they're working. Like, wow, we have this amazing superpower.
Yeah.
Where we can tap into the one and only God in our working.
Absolutely.
Why don't we do this?
Yeah.
And sometimes I think it's because we do get caught up in our work. So I've got a friend, Matt, and what he has on his phone is a silent alarm, but his phone suddenly flashes at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m.
Yeah.
Pray, pray, pray. And that's just a reminder to him that breaks him out of, his work stuff that says, hey, pay attention here to God.
That's great.
And it's a great talking point too, because sometimes people have seen his phone flashing and it says, pray, pray, pray. What is that about?
What's going on?
He gets to talk about the fact that, it's just a reminder to him that this is a spiritual discipline he needs to do.
Yeah.
We got to pray.
Absolutely.
And then incarnational working. Jesus was God who became human. And in the same way, we can show people who God is and what Jesus is like in our work. We can be, my friend Jill McGilvray calls it Jesus with skin on.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful opportunity to be attractive in that way.
Yeah.
So the question, what would Jesus do? I mean, it became a bit tokenistic, I think, but can we legitimately think, how can I be Jesus to these people here? What would that take? And God, please show me how I can do that, create the opportunity.
Not an unreasonable question, is it?
No, no, it's great.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a place of vulnerability.
Yeah.
But it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a story about someone who he runs a home maintenance business. He was doing some work in this place and he was working in the kitchen beautiful, gorgeous kitchen, and he was doing this stuff. And he was just putting drilling the last hole in, and he saw light the other side. And he had a terrible feeling in the pit of his stomach because he shouldn't have seen light.
Yes.
And he went around the other side, realised he'd put 18 holes into this cupboard that were on the other side. He hadn't checked the thickness, and he drilled in too deep. Now, what do you do in that sort of circumstance? Do you cover it up? Do you sort of pretend it's not as bad as it is? Well, he went to the owner, and he said, I've really stuffed up.
Yep.
I'm so sorry, and I will do whatever it takes to fix this. And this is not your problem, it's my problem.
Yep.
But I just want to show you what I've done. I want to apologise. So he did that. And he said, it might take a couple of days to do this. And the guy said, that's fine. And he said, look, still bill us for your work. And he said, well, yeah. So this person decided that what he would do is he would halve the bill, because that was the only fair thing to do. And he said, no, I'll still fix it. This is going to cost more.
Yeah.
This guy, the owner, paid the bill immediately, which is rare for some of the customers for a small business.
That's true.
But also sent this amazing email that said, you take pride in your work. We can see that. You like doing good work. It really upset that you didn't do good work in this circumstance. He said, but we're only human. We stuff up. We understand that.
Yeah.
So what really impressed us was the way you responded to this. He said, we think that it's not surprising that we make mistakes, but you can tell who a person really is by the way they respond to their mistake.
Yeah.
He said, we're amazed with how you responded.
Yeah.
And we just want to tell you that we know that you're going to go the whole way. You're going to fix this up. He said, and we also want you to know that we're going to use you again and again and again. We're going to tell our friends about you.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh my goodness. And for this Christian home maintenance person, like even when he stuffed up, there was something of Jesus in the humility and the asking forgiveness, and then and something in Jesus in the grace that was then shown him.
Yeah.
That is just beautiful.
Yeah.
And that has actually created an opportunity that stuffing up and forgiveness and almost reconciliation has created an opportunity for relationship working forward together, which can allow conversation. And there's an illustration there of the gospel that is beautiful and deep.
I love that.
So even in our stuffing up, we can incarnate Jesus. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there's two more. Another one is spirit-empowered working. That's another spiritual discipline I think we can practice. Yeah. We think the Spirit fills us with gifts just for Sunday and they go away Monday. Nah. No. We need those spiritual gifts for Monday to Saturday as well. And the gifts can be gifts of leadership, teaching, serving, generosity. They're all the gifts mentioned in Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12. Yeah. But we need those other gifts as well. We need more Christians being prophetic in the workplace. Yeah. And
supernatural should be natural to us, really.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And healing.
Yeah.
I see the prophet in you. And I'm sure you use that gifting in many ways. And it doesn't have to be the Holy Spirit told me when you're working with non-Christian clients. But
definitely
it's
but yeah, you do get insights and for sure.
And the gift of discernment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have the gift of discernment when I'm mentoring people. And I might not say the Spirit has told me this, but I'll say, I'm just having a sense of this. Is this, does this, and if they ask, how did you know that?
Yeah.
I can reveal that. They've asked questions. But I know that spiritual gift is being used in that circumstance.
Love that. That's so good.
And the last spiritual discipline I think we need is justice, a sense of social justice.
Yes.
I listened to you and your daughter having a chat.
Yeah, I learned lots of things from her.
I see that spiritual gift of seeing justice, that spiritual discipline of social justice is strong in her.
It is.
And that's one of the ways that Christians have been amazing through the centuries.
That's
it's
true.
Just
That's
leaning
true,
into
actually,
that.
isn't it? Yeah.
And most of the things that we now look at and say, wow, look at the difference that Christianity made, it's through people's ordinary work. It's through Christian doctors setting up hospitals. It's through Christian teachers setting up schools. It's through Christians saying, we're killing the planet. Can you please take notice? And, let's have more sustainable practices and let's lead that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a Christian accountant who invented accounting methods that actually prevented corruption. Like Christians have been at the forefront of this.
Yes.
All through the ages, through their ordinary work.
Yeah.
We still need Christians to stand up for justice in our ordinary work.
We do.
And you also had Liz Henderson, Christians standing up for actually ethical fashion practices and a completely transformed way of doing business.
Yeah.
I mean, we need all of that.
It's a great opportunity, isn't it? We're called to particular places. If we don't recognize that, nothing's going to happen, really. We'll just do our thing. But if we recognize that he's called us to that, then all of a sudden, we're plugged into heaven.
Yep.
We have what I call the Christian advantage.
Yep.
We spend time with God. He knows everything, sees everything. And the opportunity, if we're willing and obedient to him, we can do some phenomenal things. It's a wonderful opportunity.
I think of what Esther said when she said, for such a time as this, or it was told to her, for such a time as this, she was the right person in the right place and at the right time. And I think Christians can have those moments if we're paying attention, if we're open, if we're listening, if we're open to the prompting of the Spirit.
Definitely. Be mindful of his presence. I can't remember so many meetings I've been in where things are not going well. Board meetings, and those things can be quite testy from time to time.
Yep.
And just by becoming aware of his presence, just opening my heart, just to sort of hear from him, the whole atmosphere in the room changes. Which sounds like a really weird thing, but it's a very practical application of prayer and in circumstances. We have this wonderful opportunity to make a difference. When even the Lord's Prayer, it's kind of Christianity 101.
Yeah.
Let it be on earth as it is in heaven.
Absolutely.
Not many workplaces look like heaven. So there's a little bit of work to do there.
Yeah.
And I think the way that I like to think about it is that there's a heavenly template for wherever we are.
Yep.
And there's a difference between that, what that should look like where we are, and what's actually going on. And
Yes.
so praying those things in. You talked about the work and worship, and those two things coming together. For me, it's kings and priests. We're kind of both.
Yes.
So we've an application in the world where we need to change things and do things, but also we're hearing from heaven and we're connected and we're interceding for the workplace and the people around us as well. So we're both kings and priests together. I think often those things have been too separated. I think we're called to be both.
Yeah.
Well, that's a big download, Cara. There's so much stuff you've got me going on there. Just coming back to sort of fundamental basics, like all the things we've been talking about are really based on our relationship with our Heavenly Father.
Yep.
How did you come to the Lord in the first place?
Yes. Well, I grew up in a non-Christian family. I think you did too.
Yeah,
we share that.
Yeah.
And I probably would never have become a Christian except I loved horses.
Okay.
And some of my friends from school were going on a horse riding camp.
Yep.
So I begged my parents to let me go on this horse riding camp.
Yeah.
And what I didn't know, what my parents didn't know, was that it was a Christian horse riding camp.
Oh, no.
So as well as
Undercover.
riding horses, we listened to this person, and he was a cartoonist and he drew these beautiful pictures and he would draw as he spoke. It was just an incredible gift. And I was captivated by the drawings, but also by the stories he told about this person Jesus I'd never heard about, and what Jesus would do. And he drew these different pictures. We were there for 5 days and I was sort of watching and listening. And then he drew the final picture, and the final picture was Jesus standing at the door and knocking on the door. And as he drew the picture, he pointed out there was no handle on the outside. Yeah. There was only a handle on the inside. And of course it was Revelation 3:20, Behold, I stand at the door and knock. And the speaker explained, only you can open the door of your heart and invite Jesus in, and Jesus wants to come in to your heart. Yeah. So that night I lay on my bed and I just said, Jesus, I invite you into my heart. And I felt this warmth. And I just knew irrevocably Jesus was now in me, in my heart. And I felt different from that moment to now. I can still remember absolutely that moment, that feeling. So next day they said, right, if anyone has prayed that sort of prayer, you know, put up your hand. And they were shocked because like there were a whole bunch of us heathens who put up our hand.
That's great.
And they were obviously overwhelmed because they didn't have enough Bibles to hand out. And so they just sort of gathered us in groups and they said, right, well, go to church and read a Bible, and which would have been great, except how would I get to church? My family didn't go to church. How would I get a Bible? And so, yeah, I went home and I told my parents I'd become a Christian, and they were horrified.
Yeah.
And my parents to this day still believe it's the worst decision they ever made, which is really sad. Wow. My mum said that just a couple of years ago, and I just went, oh, really? Yeah. They could see that something had shifted and something had changed. But I was different. And how was God going to reach me? Well, he reached me through books. I was an avid reader.
Okay.
I read the Narnia series. I read Madeleine L'Engle. And suddenly as I read these books, stuff would just jump out to me. God illuminated parts of it. Sometimes there was a hint of scripture. Sometimes, you know, I knew Aslan was Jesus. I don't know how I knew, but I just knew.
Yeah.
And God grew me just through these incidental things, music, movies, to the point where by the time I was old enough to take myself to church, I had a basic theological understanding.
Yeah.
Which, and a way of interacting with popular culture.
Yeah.
That was foreign to the people around me.
Yeah.
But for me, there has always been integration. I've always looked for God in the everyday, looked for Jesus in creativity, because that's how God shaped me and formed me and grew me in my faith. So for me, it's natural that these things go together, just as it was right from the beginning.
Yeah.
What's unnatural is that they be split apart. I've always been surprised at the way Christians separate Sunday and Monday. It just feels so foreign to me.
Yeah.
Because for me, I've seen God in everything. Yeah.
That's great. Well, we had very similar experiences in some ways.
Yeah.
In some ways. With parents, I know no one's beyond redemption. My mum and dad both became Christians about 6 months after I did. Not led by me. We were all split up doing different things.
Wow.
They were all led by different people.
What a gift.
And my 3 brothers as well. All came to the Lord within all different experiences. So we're a walking testimony to the grace of God. And as one of my friends or people I knew from school bumped into them later on, they said, "Oh, if you can become a Christian, anybody can become a Christian." Okay, that's good. Nice. Good to know.
It's sort of a compliment, isn't it?
I don't know. I have no idea. I don't think so. Oh, God, yeah, and his patience and endurance and grace and mercy and things. But my mum ended up on the mission field. Ended up in Haiti and Honduras and ran a fistula hospital in Sierra Leone. So
that's incredible.
These were, massive total life-changing conversion experiences. But like you, coming from that background, there's no separation. I gave my life to the Lord. I was a shop assistant at a menswear store with a zoology degree, and pretty obnoxious and antisocial at the time. A little less now. Not a lot, but a little less. And yet he's taken me on this journey of from there to running multinational companies, and that doesn't happen without a lot of divine intervention. But I think the surrender piece is what it's all about, the obedience. And you talked about the integrity and ethics, and those they're not tested unless they become inconvenient.
Yes, that's good.
And sort of my way of dealing with that was promotions and provision, and that's all yours. So I will do whatever I can do your way. It's not been a perfect journey, but that's the kind of the baseline, and the rest of it, how it's perceived. You're my provider, and if you've got a plan for my life, you'll work that out. I just need to. You have to do it God's way in order if you want His outcomes.
Yes.
But that does get tested more often than I'd like, I think. Thank you for sharing that story. That's beautiful. It's always great to hear people's stories of how they came to the Lord.
Yeah.
Can I pivot the conversation a little bit
Sure.
to church? We talked a little bit about it at the start. How do you find? Where do you think churches are at the moment? Because often declining or static or slow growing congregations. Pastors very protective. It's pastors' kind of spirit to want to hold people and love them and do that. It's not a social norm now to go to a church on a Sunday just out of tradition, really. What do you think the opportunity for church is if there's a revelation of the importance of the workplace and a more integrated life?
I think there's massive opportunity, to be honest. And yeah, unfortunately, part of the way we can get through to pastors sometimes is to say, your church could grow.
Yeah, it's true though. I completely believe it.
Whether it's about them thinking about their personal church growing or the kingdom growing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so one of the things I see is cut through with pastors. If I say, if you're trying to hold an event and get people to come, we pray, we work hard, we invite, and we might get, 10 people through the door who aren't our church people. We might got 15 or 20, and maybe you get 50, like you're beginning to praise really loudly, or 100. But every day the people in your congregation have connections with 10, 20 pre-Christians, let's call them, during your average week, whether it's in home, neighbourhood, community, or the workplace. We have these connection points. What is the more effective mission strategy? To try and claw and invite them in, or to equip your people to be more effective as they go out?
Yeah.
I think the basic thing that holds back a lot of pastors is fear.
Yeah.
Because you lose control when you do that. Yeah. Rather than sort of getting people into my space where I feel safe and secure and I can do this stuff and I'm the expert. Equipping people and sending them out feels a little scary.
Sounds biblical though, doesn't it?
Oh, it really does.
Pastors and teachers are to do what? Works of service, where are they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even Jesus' last words, the communication to make disciples. I think we've done pretty good at sort of evangelizing, but we haven't done very well at making disciples. And that's the other way where I challenge pastors. How are we making disciples for the workplace? Yeah. And that doesn't mean as a pastor, you have to be expert in the workplace or every vocation. You just have to help people to be able to translate and integrate and to draw on God's resources and to be strong. And you need to pray for them and you need to invite them back and hear the stories and console them and stand alongside them. Like that's what I think the role of pastor is. But is
it shifting, do you think?
I hope so. I think it is.
Contextualized teaching
and the funny thing that's happening is, so I teach in Bible colleges in other places in the world.
Yeah.
And they're
Adjunct Professor.
Oh, thank you. That just means a professor who's not paid much, to be honest.
I wonder what that was. A qualifying term was all about.
Sorry, I don't have tenure. Yes. So when I get to do that, I see that where Christianity is growing fastest and strongest, so Asia, South America, Africa, the Bible colleges there get this. Yes. So they're teaching people and teaching pastors this material. That's why they're asking me to teach it. And then part of my thing is put someone in class with me who can learn it and then they can teach it after me. I don't want to be the one who's slowing this down. And the pastors are hungry for it in those places because there's less of this artificial divide that we see here. They live in communities where, if you're Muslim, your religion impacts what you eat, how often you pray through the day, and it doesn't stop when you're working. Your giving, it affects your whole life. If you're a Hindu, it affects what you eat and how you ceremonially wash. If you're a Buddhist, it affects how you see temptations and desires. So in other religions, it's whole of life. It's only Western Christianity that has put this divide up. So people in those pastors in those fastest growing areas in Asia, America, Africa, South America, we're seeing those churches hungry for this teaching and responding. And I think that what's happening in the West is that pastors are beginning to realizing people aren't just coming in through the door anymore.
Yeah.
And we need to shift.
It's a massive cultural mindset.
It is.
Shift. I think Billy Graham, who you could argue knows a thing or two about evangelism, said the next great move of God will be through the workplace.
Yeah.
Is it changing? Is it shifting?
I think it is. I think it is in Western society as well. So I'm writing a book with 2 pastors in America because America's on that cusp of sort of declining Christianity. They just slipped over into the sort of less than 50% of people are going to church on a Sunday, which for them is massive. Sure. We've been there for a little while. And so they're asking questions, and churches there are asking questions. And so these 2 pastors want to say, we need to help pastors understand how we're talking about a rift between church and business leaders. How do we do this? Yeah. How do we cross that rift? How do we build a bridge across it? So that book is aimed at pastors.
Workship 3, is it?
No. I've discovered that's a lousy way of naming books.
It's good.
I'm never doing that again.
No, it's a good way. I'm only jesting with you. It's great.
It lacks creativity, and also people think you don't have to read everyone. But yeah, it's so that to me sounds like there's a bit of a shift happening there.
So the reintegration back from people who are in the marketplace have gone, we don't want to do church, connecting back into the body. That's great.
And pastors saying we need business people.
Yeah.
We need this to do this whole project church really well and to be on God's mission in the world.
Yeah.
And last couple of years, I've joined with another couple of pastors in Australia working with several churches who actually want to do this and do this well. And it can't just be a program. It's not just a series of sermons or something like that. It's actually got to be a shift in the culture of the church, from inward looking to outward looking, to discipling for church programs, to discipling for all of life. Like it's a real big mindset shift for everyone in the church. I think it's biblical. But it needs to happen.
It's a revelation, I think, too.
It is.
Because if you get so used to doing something in a certain way, you just need a divine revelation to go, oh, hang on. Yeah. A friend of mine, we used to meet every Friday and we'd pray together, and a bunch of other business people. And then he heard me speak at a conference and he came up to me after and said, oh, I get it now. I said, hang on. We've been talking together about this sort of thing for a number of years. He goes, no, something on the inside of me shifted today.
Yes.
I get it. So I think there is a need for a little bit of revelation and praying into this space.
And you would know what revelation means. Like the Greek term for revelation is actually an unveiling, a pulling back of the veil.
That's great.
And we understand that, when someone becomes a Christian, the veil is pulled back and they see God and they see who they are and their need for Jesus. But I think the church needs an unveiling that actually we've been co-opted into this divide, which is artificial, which is stopping us effectively doing God's mission in the world. Yeah. It needs the veil pulled back as well.
Indeed. Any last words of encouragement for people who are out in the marketplace doing it, kind of get this and trying to work out how to do it well? Any words of encouragement for them?
I think I remember this Aboriginal guy who was in a class I was teaching once. When I was sort of talking about this stuff and vocation, that vocation isn't just for church work or mission work, but vocation is whatever God has gifted you to do, leaning into that. He said to me, I've always had an uncomfortable feeling sitting in the pews that God wanted me to do this stuff. Yeah. He said, but I always felt that I had to give it up, or that was the Christ thing. So for him, it was just this relief of being able to lean into his gifting and just to see what God would open up. And God ended up opening up all these opportunities amongst his people in communities to be a life-giving difference and bring flourishing in so many different ways. And I guess that's my encouragement to people. If you've got this feeling that there is more, that just to lean into it, to feel that God is with you in this. Lean into your gifting, lean into where that sense of being called somewhere. And I think the other thing is we're often very individualistic. So my encouragement would be get people around you who can encourage you and support you and pray for you.
Absolutely.
We do that for missionaries. Missionaries, the first thing you do is get a prayer group around you.
Yeah.
I mean, we all need that for whatever place God is calling us to. So those people that you're gathering around you, you pray for them where God is calling them to as well.
Yeah.
And keep connecting in with God's people. We need the gifts of the music and the experience of being with God's people and having communion together. We need that stuff. It's not like we turn our back on the church to do this stuff. Actually, we see that Sunday experience is equipping us to do that as well. I would say lean into it.
Lean into it. Love that. I had a South American woman contact me who said that she had someone had given her my book and the Monday Matters book, and it sort of released her. She came from a very traditional church background and really struggled with her role as a woman and a desire to be an entrepreneur. And she really wrestled with that, but she found that gave her a sense of freedom. So now she's very successful in business, started a whole network of Christian women entrepreneurs. And I know that's a passion of yours as well. She wrote a book called The Sleeping Queen.
Oh, wow.
And she's just really kind of taken off in the midst of that from a little revelation of almost you know what, it's okay. God's put those desires in your heart. Off you go.
And I bet when you were writing Monday Matters, you did not imagine someone in African, a woman, reading it and getting a revelation. I mean, isn't God amazing?
Yeah,
how
absolutely.
He can take little words or little encouragements and then work through that with His Spirit. Yeah. Wow, what a beautiful thing.
Oh, yeah, it's wonderful, wonderful thing. Could you talk a little bit about the role of women? I mean, because women entrepreneurs, I know, Wendy Simpson's a great friend of both of us.
Shout out to Wendy.
I know.
Love you, Wendy.
Legend, Wendy. You're a legend. Sometimes there seems to be a little bit of confusion between a woman's role in the church in some denominations and the translation of that maybe into the workplace. And yet I spend most of my time with non-Christian workplaces and working with leaders. And there's been an ascendancy of women in business circles, in the business mountain, if you like.
Yep.
Which is great. Rebalancing that, fantastic. I love that. So it's kind of been a bit of passion of mine to see that happen.
Thank you, Mark.
In a secular environment. And yet Christian women, business leaders or professionals, there's almost a reluctance to engage in that. And what I'm seeing is women with a completely different agenda and a different background and different things that they want to achieve, influencing culture in that area, in those areas, in the absence of Christian women putting up their hand and going for it.
Yeah.
It's a big question. I'm not sure it's that clear, but there's some confusion there, I think, around that. Do you find that?
Yeah. One of the comments I make is I think the most undiscipled people in congregations are women in business.
Wow. Yeah.
It's a big call, but a lot of the activity for women in churches is based around mothering and discipling into those sorts of activities. And that's really important. And I don't want that to stop.
Yeah.
And most of the work around men is they will have a men's breakfast and they'll get a speaker from the workplace. A successful business person like yourself will come in and talk and they get encouraged and opportunities. But women who feel called to the marketplace don't often get much feeding.
Yeah.
They have to go outside the church to look for that, which is really sad. I remember there was this woman I met in America one time when I was there in Denver, and we're talking, and she'd been called into this parachurch organisation. We were celebrating women in their callings that my friend Joanna Meyer had set up. And she said to me, she started at this church. She'd been moved by sort of her corporate into Denver, and they started going to this church, she and her family. And they said to her, "Oh, you've got a beautiful smile. You can be on the welcoming team." Mm-hmm. And she said, "Oh, there's a problem with that. I do a lot of travel." And they went, "Oh, okay." And they said, "Well, we can work around that. You've got kids. We can put you on the kids' church roster." Mm. And she said, "I'm not sure that's the best thing for me." She said, "My husband's actually better at that sort of stuff than I am." Yeah. And they just looked a little confused and left her alone thinking, ooh. She said she's chief information officer for a major corporate.
Yeah.
And she's like, "I would love to look at their whole IT system and how they communicate, and I'd love to rework that."
Yeah.
But they would never ask her to do it because they never ask her, "What do you do?" Yeah. So even though she said she travels a lot and her husband does a lot with the kids, they never thought, "Oh, what do you do?" Yeah. And then how can we match your gifts to what we're doing? Or how can we support you in what you're doing? Yeah. They never asked those questions. Yeah. And she was saying no one has ever asked her in any church she's been in what she does during the week.
Wow.
Which is astonishing.
That's crazy, isn't it? Like, seriously, just
and then I think of
alienating half your congregation or more, usually.
I think of another woman who said to me, she rang me because she said, I burst into tears on church on Sunday. And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because my pastor said, 'How was your week at work?'" Mm-hmm. She said, "It's the first time any minister has asked me how my work week was." She burst into tears because it's so unusual.
Yeah.
So we need better messaging about this. And I think that sometimes women who are called to business just feel like they're pariahs in the church because there's so much talk about, the examples in sermons are often men at work and women in the home. Mm-hmm. But to hear women celebrated in their work as well would just be lovely.
Yeah.
But that's not to downplay our role. I was a stay-at-home mum. I consulted at the same time, but I was a stay-at-home mum. Mothering is one of the most important works I've done, but I see it as a work.
Yeah.
It was unpaid work.
Yeah.
It was joyful, fulfilling work. I haven't been able to give up that work. Apparently you're a mother for life.
Yeah.
And I don't want to give it up, but it's still going. But it's alongside the other work that I do. And I think that sometimes women who feel called to the marketplace just feel like they're not celebrated in that or prayed for. They don't get the opportunity to talk about how hard it is as well as how good it is. They feel guilty for being ambitious in those places because they feel that God's placed in their heart a passion for their work.
Yeah.
And so, I think those women can feel quite lonely in Christian settings and just feel that it's not addressed.
It's a shame. That needs to change.
Yeah.
It does need to change. And also I think for young professional single women, there's almost a thing in church culture that you're not validated until you're married.
Yes.
Which is
100%.
Crazy.
It's all part of that.
So there's a whole bunch of traditional Christian thinking that's cultural, not necessarily biblical, that's impacting.
Well, you look at Proverbs 31, which is often described as the perfect wife, but it's actually, the Hebrew means the valiant woman.
Yeah.
Which sort of shifts it a bit.
And she's busy.
Yeah.
Buying fields and.
Exactly. She's entrepreneurial.
Totally.
And she's also got a social justice element. She feeds the poor from the bounty that she's providing.
That's a great starting place, isn't it, really, for that? If you're having a debate in congregations around the role of women, that's a wonderful picture.
It covers the whole gamut.
Absolutely.
Everything. And it shows that women, it's not meant to be all in one person necessarily, or all at one time even. Yeah. I think it just shows a celebration of all the different things that women can do.
Yeah. And the season's in that too, isn't there? I know in commercial circles around on-ramp and off-ramp for women and having children and managing that. And I know a lot of workplaces are endeavouring to engage more in that, and making that work better.
Well, I love the way the Christians in the workplace have often been champions for setting up better systems around that. which
Definitely.
I think is really, really good. And probably to our shame, churches and theological colleges and other Christian organisations have sometimes been slower at being proactive in creating flexible work environments that enable both mums and dads to be able to balance these paid and unpaid work roles more effectively.
Definitely. Great way to look at it. We need to do better in this space for sure. Cara, I think we're just about out of time. I could talk for another hour here easily. It's just been wonderful talking to you. As I said, I hold you in the highest regard. I love the fact that you bring some wonderful theological rigor to everything that you do as well. So envious of all that you have, knowledge you have around biblical teaching, which is wonderful. But you're doing a great job and really appreciate you. And thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for joining us at the Monday Movement Vodcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. And if you want to know more about what we do, you can find us at mondaymovement.com.